All right, so this is kind of cool. If you were with me in the big room, we would be doing this on a whiteboard. I am doing this on my iPad. So we're going to see how this works. What we're going to be talking about today is what is called the cerebral cortex. So I'm going to take you through what is known as the forebrain. This is the outside of the brain. This is the part of the brain where a lot of the higher level functions are happening. So let's see if we can do this. So I wish I had cool sound effects to go along with this, because I remember being a kid and watching Nickelodeon and there being one of these things that has cool sound effects as you were writing. But so I'm just learning how to do this. Let's not get too complicated. All right, so here we've got our brain, right? Give the cerebellum its little things there. We talked about some of this stuff, right? We talked about this being the hind brain, right? This area is the brain stem. This area is the cerebellum. So we talked about what those different things do. What we want to talk about now is what the outer part of the brain is going to be doing. So I'm going to draw just a little bit here. Now this, if you can't tell, is not going to be a perfect rendition of the brain. Just some general areas for you to get an idea of the stuff that's happening in different parts. So don't go doing brain surgery based on this drawing. That would be a really, really bad thing to do. So what we've got here is we've got the frontal lobe. Now the frontal lobe is called the frontal lobe because it's in the front. Psychology's not hard, right? This is the biggest part of your brain. In humans, it's about 20% of your brain. We have the largest frontal lobe of any animal in the animal kingdom. Our next closest dogs use about 8% of their brain for frontal lobes, but we have by far the biggest amount. So the frontal lobe here, there are a couple of things. Personality is going to be here. If you remember our story when we were talking about how we know what different parts of the brain do, we talked about this guy named Phineas Gage, right? And with Phineas Gage, right, we said that tamping iron came up and went right here, right? It's going to cut through the left frontal lobe. We talked about how his wife said that his personality really changed. So let's go ahead and take that out because we don't want our guy's personality to change. Another thing that is here is impulse control. And so this is kind of that little voice in your head that tells you I shouldn't do this or I should behave myself, that sort of thing. This is where a lot of that decision making is going to go on. One of the interesting things here is if you know anybody that's got like ADHD, this part of the brain is part of the brain that doesn't work as well with people with ADHD. It's just not as active as it is with most folks, and that's what causes those symptoms. And believe it or not, with ADHD, you actually get a stimulant to help kind of combat those symptoms. And so you would think somebody really hyper, you'd give them something that would calm that activity. Actually, what you're doing is you are making this front part, right, this impulse control, you're making it work stronger. And so that's where that's where kind of that medication is working. So all this stuff is in the frontal lobe of the brain. So impulse control, personality, a lot of times kind of the adding up of everything, kind of the your brain kind of figuring out solving problems and that kind of stuff. If you go right behind there, you've got what's called the motor strip. And the motor strip, as you may have guessed from the name, is where your motor functions are happening. So when you're moving around, there are parts of the motor strip that are lighting up. And so you have a left motor strip, which is controlling the right side of your body. You got a right motor strip that's controlling the left side of your body. And so those two things are where all your motions are happening. Our brain scanning technology is so good today that they can actually isolate where on that motor strip certain functions are happening, down to even like the famous guitarist named Eric Clapton from the 70s, that they actually could figure out where the parts that were controlling his individual fingers were working there in the motor strip. So that's where motor function is. Now we got sensory strip right behind there. Now you notice I made a little squiggly line there, and that is because this is called the fissure, and it's just a little kind of signpost in the brain to tell you where that split can happen. It's just an indentation in the brain. Now, you also may be wondering, the brain, my brain here obviously is smooth. Our brain is very wrinkly. It's what's called convoluted. And what it means is that those wrinkles allow for more brain tissue, more brain mass to be inside of our skulls. So our brains actually have more area and more neurons because of those wrinkles that are in our brain. And I just like the word convoluted. So in the sensory strip, right, there are 3 of your senses that are here. And those 3 senses are smell. That's a pretty good nose, right? Touch. That's a really bad hand. Smell, touch, and taste. So let's see if I can do a tongue. Yeah, so smell, touch, and taste are all there in the sensory strip. So there are different parts that will have those things. Different people have different sensitivities, obviously, to of those types of things. And that's just where the sensation, kind of the mechanism for understanding the sensation is located, obviously. Smell's greatly involved with what's going on in your nose. Smell and taste are connected. If you've ever tried to eat a meal and your nose is stuffy, a lot of times it doesn't taste as good. And so there are things that are connecting there. In this next part is what is called the parietal lobe. Now, the parietal lobe is one that really you can't tell the name, right, from what it is. This is, there's lots of stuff going on in here, but the main thing we're going to look at is this is where memory is, especially your personal memory is in the parietal lobe. So those images, those things of the first memories that you have, birthday parties you liked, certain events, things like that, are going to be stored in the parietal lobe. We're going to talk about that memory process in a couple of weeks, but that's where those memories are. Now, there's a lot of connection between the sensory strip and the parietal lobe. That's because certain smells, especially, will bring back certain memories. Maybe you have one of those. I remember when Mandy and I got our first house, cleaning out the house before we moved our stuff in, and opened up one of the closets, and there was a smell that came out. It wasn't a bad smell. It was a smell that really reminded me of my grandma's house. It just smelled like grandma's house. And as I kind of dug through the closet, there was a box of mothballs that were in there. If you've ever seen mothballs, they're something, people used to put in closets and things to keep moths from coming in and eating sweaters and things like that. And apparently my grandma used a lot of mothballs because it smelled just like grandma's house. And so you've got connections there. It's also one of the reasons if you get sick eating a particular type of food, a lot of times you don't want that type of food anymore. And it's because the memory of that gets really strongly linked to the taste. Now, back here in the back, we have what's called the occipital lobe. Now, the occipital lobe is seeing. So this is the part of the brain that's going to interpret the signals that are coming in from your eyes. Now, this always struck me as kind of funny because obviously your eyes are up here, right? That your 2 eyes are going to be up here. But there are big bundles of nerves, right, that run directly from the eye back here into the occipital lobe, and that's going to be where that information is kind of stored. So this is going to be where seeing is. Now, the cool thing is when stuff comes into your brain or it comes into your eyes, it comes in upside down, what you're seeing. And one of the jobs of the occipital lobe is to flip it right side up again. I remember being in college and a professor telling us about an experiment where in another class, this professor had given students goggles to wear that turned the world upside down. So everything they saw upside down. And asked them to wear them that way for a week. Well, after about 3 days, their brains adjusted. And so they're wearing these things all the time. And when they woke up one morning, the world was right side up again. Their brain had said, wait a minute, this isn't right. And so it flipped everything. Now, the problem is, what do you think happened when they took those goggles off? Well, let me just tell you, that would have been a long 3 days hoping that things were going to flip right side up again. But very complicated part of the brain. Seeing and vision is a very complicated process, but a lot of that's going to happen in the occipital lobe. The last one we have here is what's called the temporal lobe. And the temporal lobe is right where your temple is on your head. And it's got two jobs. It is hearing and speech. Now, that makes sense, right? Because that's right where your ears are. This is the only part of your brain that doesn't cross hemispheres. So your left temporal lobe is connected to your left ear, the right to the right ear. And so they don't switch when that's, when the rest of this stuff does. There's obviously a connection between speech and hearing. A lot of times if you can't hear very well, you can tell that in people's speech when they have hearing difficulties. This, if you remember talking about the what different parts of the brain do, there are a couple of areas here. Broca's area is a really famous one. That was an area of the brain that got damaged. I'm thinking it's right around there. That controls speech and hearing. So those two things are going to be in the temporal lobe. So, like I said, just a kind of a little rundown of what different parts of the brain, kind of how they specialize. That doesn't mean that everything that controls those is just in that part, but what it means is that's where a lot of the functions are. So if you were to hook somebody up and have them talk or read, you'd see a lot of activity kind of in this temporal lobe area. If you ask somebody to talk, but then they're telling you about a memory that they had, well, maybe this part, right, starts to light up a little bit in there. So you've got all kinds of different ways that these parts of the brain are going to work together to give you the higher functions that are going to be so important there in the brain. So hopefully this hasn't been too bad. Like I said, usually it's a little more dramatic on a whiteboard, but it's kind of cool that we were able to do this this way. So if you've got questions, you let me know. Next up, I think we're going to talk a little bit about what happens when part of your brain is damaged and how the brain can kind of make up for some of the damage that can sometimes happen. So I will see you next time.